And ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce for the very first time as husband and wife, Meghan and Derek.
Last name?
Wiedemann.
Hey guys, and welcome to Little Black Book 91. We're talking to you guys about Married at First Sight Season 19, Episode 2. We are breaking down Meghan and Derek. Yes, this couple is so interesting, and I'm going to tell you why. Because Meghan's about to be the biggest problem you've ever realized. Not because she's actually bad, but actually because she has a controlling mother. And when I was writing my notes, I was like, I feel like she's more of an anxious person. If you know, we talk about attachment styles around here a lot. But as I was listening more and I went to watch it back again, I was like, no, her mother's really controlling to the point where she doesn't even trust her own voice. Now, if you know anything about fearful avoidance or even anxious people, right, they tend to externalize their relationships. What does that mean? It means they tend to give over power. So for instance, Meghan here will say like she needs the experts to tell her what to choose and who to choose because she doesn't have trust in her own discernment and her own voice. She doesn't believe it because her mother has actually eroded her voice. There's another part where Meghan tells us that that she works with her mom and her dad and her brother-in-law, and she doesn't know, almost like there's no distinction between mother and father and boss. And the reason why is because there's a lack of boundaries. And something, again, that fearful avoidance also struggle with because they're not often allowed to have boundaries because of the control her mother did. And then the mother told us how she felt about her having kids. She wants a boy, but her daughter wants a son. Like, mum, your voice is not that important. But the mum, again, wants to tell us how much she's involved in her daughter's life, almost living in her daughter's life and not allowing her to breathe. And so this is going to tell us that this is probably going to be an issue for family in terms of mother-in-law probably snooping and being nosy. And it's interesting, if you watch actually the episode 2, you rarely see much of Derek's family background being spoken about. In fact, I was going back through it, and again, I said, all I know is that his parents have been married for almost 43 years. They seem very secure. Nothing crazy. He's been traveling around the world. He's been, doing a few things here and there and just enjoying life. And not like he's a vagabond or anything, but just generally has had the means to be able to travel around and still work. So he's lived life. He's an extrovert, and she describes herself as an introvert. So I'm going to break it down for you today, right? How does a controlling mother play a role in the fearful avoidance life? How is this relationship going to suffer, and where can they win in this relationship as well? Because there's not just negatives, there's positives also about this particular relationship. So stick around, make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, and you click on that wonderful bell button for the notifications of the uploads. You got the minerals, you got the minerals. If you don't know, I used to sing a lot, so we bringing that back. Okay. All right. Listen, don't play with it. Don't play with it. Don't play with it. Stay hydrated. Let's get on to this video. Don't forget to hype the video up because that helps with the analytics as well. So I told you about this fearful avoidant thing. And if you're new to this and you're new to this concept, fearful avoidant is a part of one of the 4 attachment styles that John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, British psychologists, who discovered that how children are reared and how they have a relationship with their caregivers affects how they have relationships with adults as well. I mean, it seems like common sense. And what they discovered is that relationships are built on a bedrock of emotional attachments and connections. And so with fearful avoidance, they grew up in households where there usually is a fear element as well as also there being a comforting element. And you may be thinking, how does a controlling mother, who's not necessarily, she's not a mean mother, she doesn't insult her daughter or anything like that. So it looks beautiful from the outside because her parents have been married for 41 years plus. And the mother says she still gets happy when she sees her husband come through the door. So what could be wrong with this relationship? Well, the wrongness of the relationship is that when boundaries are eroded, when that child is not allowed to be themselves and express themselves, when that child doesn't have an ability to have a voice, the child becomes fearful as well as comforted by the mother. The mother is a comforting presence. She is showing love. She's appreciating her daughter. But there is an aspect where the mother's also scary and fearful because the mother doesn't allow her to live a life that she wants to live. So how can we say that? Well, let's go to the very beginning and talk about some of the things that the mother was showing with also her. Let's see. Oh, I don't lost the sound in that video. Okay, I have to put another clip. Hold on.
If I do, I want one boy.
I want a girl. Mama wants a girl
For me.
Kathy, how do you feel about all this?
I've processed it. It's taken a while. It was not pretty.
So we've seen this. The mother obviously said she wants they asked the daughter what child she wants. Why would you ever ask the mother what she wants? Like the mother is not getting married. The mother is already married. Again, this is an intrusion on the child's life. The child is lacking. The child has no boundaries here because the mother is intruding on those boundaries. Now imagine if you grew up in that way. It looks normal from the outside because it looks like your mother's so caring, so loving, and so appreciative, so protective. But actually, the mother's intruding, right? So much so.
I'm very blessed to work with my family, but it's also hard trying to split mom and dad from boss. And I realized I need something that's just my own. I started.
Why would she need to have her own? Well, because actually she has consistently had to live her life through the lens, through the viewpoints of her parents and the family. She hasn't been able to formulate her own identity. If you know anything about fearful avoidance, this is also a massive thing. They have both the avoidant aspect and the anxious side of them. The anxious side of them makes them externalize their relationships. They externalize their validation, for relationships, right? Rather than looking within. And the avoidant side makes them be avoidant as it is to emotional connection. So they both want the love, but they also fear the love. They chase it and then they run away from it at the same time, right? And that's what causes the issues for them most of the time. Now, she doesn't look like one. When I watched it originally, she did not appear as one. And I remember I've said this before, they have a great mask, but she doesn't appear as one. And the reason why is because, again, maybe in the relationship she has built, she's maybe been in a sense where she doesn't have to be the avoidant aspect. Maybe she's been the more anxious person. And I say that because, again, the way that her mother is probably so cold, she's had to be a little bit more anxious with that. But she's also lost the ability to have a voice. She's lost the ability to be able to almost speak up for herself in this instance, because there was one point where her mother was speaking and she had to speak against her mother, saying, "Mom, be kind." Right. And you see this with her friends where she's breaking down, being very emotional with her friends. But then the mother's at the same time talking to the son, saying this.
I don't take it faint of heart. I don't want her to get hurt. I think it's more to it than just somebody else picking someone out for you. Mm-hmm. But I have no control. I mean, she's a grown-up, so I don't have any control. But I don't like it.
Not any control anymore, but what we did hear was that earlier on, she told the friends of the daughter that she'd been trying to talk her daughter out of this for so many months. So again, the mother presents as if, oh yeah, but then really and truly, she's like a dragon, a little bit of a dragon behind the scenes, right? She wants to control everything. She wants to control her daughter and everything that's going on in her life, thinking that she knows best for her daughter, not recognizing she's a fully grown adult. Again, what does this do for somebody? It means that you are claustrophobic in your own household, in your own life. You are a shadow of yourself because you can't trust that your judgment would be correct. And how can I say that?
Somebody to tell me this is what you really do want. You just don't even know it. I would have done really well in a culture that does arranged marriages. Here's your husband and y'all make it work.
Now, why would she thrive in a culture where they, put her into an arranged marriage? It seems very normal because a lot of people say this, right? But the reality is because she doesn't trust her own voice. She doesn't trust her discernment. She doesn't trust her choices. Now, many people can say this because they've chosen incorrectly or chosen the wrong kind of man. But in this instance, when we collate all the information, this is a big aspect of somebody who has lost their voice. Their voice isn't as significant. And that's where it gets tricky. And I'll tell you why it gets tricky, because in a relationship, I've said it before in another video, silent anger is a real thing. And fearful avoidance are notorious because avoidants in general are notorious for being silently angry. Why? Because they often bottle things up, let it build up, and then they explode. And so with Meghan, she's telling us that she needs help to choose this thing. She needs help to do this and that. She's telling us that her mother is controlling and overbearing and she doesn't have necessarily a say-so in her own life. Well, when she gets into a marriage, all that training and conditioning is about to come up. Because you can only behave in the way that you've been trained. That's why the Bible says, train a child up in the way to go and they will not depart from it. So when you train that child to lose their voice, the problem is that eventually your back goes against the wall and then you begin to lash out. Or how do you deal with criticism? How do you deal with somebody saying, I'm not so happy? Because if you really look at it, fearful avoidance, one of their biggest fears is rejection, abandonment, and betrayal. And so if somebody says, hey, I don't like this particular behavior, which we actually see in episode 3 and 4, where he actually comes to talk to her about about his feelings and says, hey, look, you don't really ask me questions about me. I'm asking you, but you're not asking me. And she immediately becomes defensive and then immediately shuts down. And that tells me all we need to know. Immediate shutdowns tell us that she doesn't process the criticism very well. She thinks it's a criticism of her, not her behavior. and not being able to take a minute or two just to be able to say, hey, I'm hearing what you're saying, she's immediately afraid. Why? Because she actually likes him. And one of the things about fearful avoidance that struggle is that the more they like you, the more they're going to feel fear. Because the more that they like you, the more chance of you really hurting them where it hurts. So now she likes him. We've heard her. And you know how we know this? Because she kept on saying how sexy he was, how good looking his abs was. She loved his, his physique. She asked him, how come you got these abs? And she hasn't had sex in 2 years and hasn't had a relationship in 7. And look, and at that point, the fear is going to be at the massive all-time high. And this was on the honeymoon when she wows out a little bit. Right. And it's all because of the way that she's going to process the information. She's immediately processing abandonment, betrayal, rejection. And that's going to cause a lash out. Okay. And a shutdown. And the shutdown comes when we feel overwhelmed, when we're not able to emotionally regulate very well. And the regulation is in processing, understanding, and expression. Right. So when you're not able to express very well, you kind of lash out. And that can be verbally, physically, but that can also be a lash out internally. You can be very critical, very withdrawn, very numb. Okay, all right, very isolated. These are also lash outs that can happen through anger, right? And anger is just a symptom, it's a feeling of you feeling either your boundaries have been violated or you cannot reach a particular goal in mind, right? And so with that, we talk about obviously then understanding. When you don't understand something, you get confused, and that confusion can then begin to have you paralyzed, stuck. And then we have what we call processing. When you're unable to process and it becomes overwhelming to process too much emotional information, shutdown happens. And since we know that from episode 3 and 4, she does shut down, we now know why. It's an emotional overwhelming because there's only a limited capacity that she can process emotionally before she feels like she's overtaken by the constant barrage of emotional signals coming into her mind. And I'm saying a lot of jargon here, so let me make it a bit more plain. What I'm really saying is the emotional capacity of any avoidant, whether it's dismissive or fearful, the difference between fearful and dismissive is in the name. They dismiss their own emotions and tend to dismiss yours a little bit. And fearful avoidants tend to be fearful of their emotions. That's why they avoid, okay? So in this instance with a fearful avoidant, very much like a dismissive, they haven't built up the necessary capacity emotionally to be able to receive. They can give very well because the anxious side of them makes them an overgiver, but they don't recognize their own boundaries. So they overgive to exhaustion. But taking in can be very difficult. Taking in compliments, taking in criticism, taking in direction, guidance, sometimes, unless they believe that you are, and a guidance and direction can be a little bit iffy, because if they believe you to be more wiser than them, then that doesn't work the same way, right? They believe you to be more wiser than them, then they're willing to take on your instruction, but then that can also build resentment in them because now they feel like they're following your lead and not able to follow their own, right? And a quiet resentment builds up, and they're going to feel frustrated because they feel like they don't have their independence, their autonomy, and because they're following you, right? So again, that's another whole conversation. I'm mentioning all this to say because he has presented as somebody who seems very secure, but a little bit anxious. We saw him at the wedding and he seemed very nervous at points, which is normal because again, it's a wedding, you're married at first sight. But even the way he talks and the way he reports himself, we see the security, but we also see a little bit of that nervousness and that anxiousness. And why is this important? Well, because she says she's an introvert and he's an extrovert, but with the way her mother's been critical, that's probably going to come out in the way she deals with him. And the more secure he becomes at the very beginning, the more he's able to try to be resolute and be sturdy at the very beginning of things, the more she may feel frustration because she's like, how come you're not disappearing? How come you're not? She's, her self-sabotage will start to kick in, right? Now, if he can stay sturdy, it will eventually level itself out and she'll stop doing those behaviors because she's going to learn from him. But if he bites back or his anxiousness makes him want to cling more to her and be too accepting of her bad behaviors, baby, there's going to be warfare in the heavens. Because if he's going to be too accepting of her behavior without regulating and causing there to be boundaries, which we saw in episode 3 and 4, he struggled to kind of have a conversation with her, she going to take the piss. You know how we know that? Because a friend's asked her and said, you need a man that's going to be just as assertive as you. So she's an introvert, but very assertive. And we saw that in episode 3 and 4 because I think she was talking about food or diet or whatever. And the way she was talking about it, almost trying to tell him what he needed to do. And I was like, okay, this is going to become a problem later on. Because remember, he says he don't like that. How's she going to take that? How's she going to take that rejection? Right? Does she think she's going to be abandoned if he says, I don't like this? And we saw how she shut down later on in the episode. So in this episode 2, they tell us that she needs someone who's going to be assertive. And I looked at him and I said, I don't know if that's a man. I don't know if he has that level of assertiveness that he needs. Although he's very secure, I see a little bit of that anxiousness in him. And so that could be a trigger point when she feels like she has to be the strongest one in a relationship. And that resentment can also build up again, because having to fight your mom, okay, you want to be able to be in a relationship where you can rest and be taken care of in a way emotionally that you don't have to show up in a way where you're always in warfare. So what can happen out of fear if he doesn't become as assertive as she would want him to be is that she can then end up taking over the relationship and forcing him into a backseat role, and then becoming resentful about the fact that she takes on a front leadership role and the fact that he's on a back seat, which then causes more arguments. So this is going to be a really interesting dynamic between the two of them and how they're going to move forward. But again, I'll go deeper with these particular videos in later episodes. What I will say is there is opportunity here for some level of growth, right? The opportunities here is that with fearful avoidance, they can be very vulnerable and very much open to open you up. But what we heard from episode 3 and 4, it seems like he's asking the questions, she's not, which means she's gonna probably not be as vulnerable as it needs to be, right? Derek is going to be the star player here. He's going to have to model emotional safety, emotional leadership, emotional regulation, okay? Not through control, but through a security of who he is and security in knowing that he doesn't have the same level of trauma or fears about abandonment around abandonment, rejection, and also betrayal, right? Another aspect is that with him obviously being able to be sturdy, it means an opportunity for her to be able to be grounded in that relationship. So when she needs reassurance, he can give her some. When she pulls away, he can also be grounded and secure and say, I'm not going to chase you. That's if the anxious side of him doesn't kick in as well, right? So, it's going to be very interesting, okay, how much the mother is going to play a role, whether it's silently or largely, whether the mother's overt voice will cause issues or whether her silent voice, which is in Meghan's head, will play a massive issue as well, okay? So this is going to be interesting. How does he deal with her shutdowns? That's going to be a massive thing. And so we're going to be looking forward to this whole relationship because there's going to be a lot that's going to happen that we're going to have to really work through. There seems to be, like I said, an identity issue in terms of boundaries, and that is going to play a massive role later on if he feels uncomfortable with how much control the mother may have in scenarios. So my time is up, and I appreciate you guys. This is the kind of stuff we do in coaching all the time. If you are looking to heal, you're saying this is Meghan is like me, I'm very similar, then you need to definitely reach out to me so we can get on your journey of growth, transformation, and also healing. We're here for you, and we want to help you win, and we want to help you grow, okay? So make sure you guys share, like, subscribe, and also you're doing a massive thing. You are hyping this video up because don't let me be hanging, bro. I'm putting in effort in these videos, rude boy. Don't make me hang, blood.
Hello.
Okay?